So good morning, and I want to thank the organizers and this nice introduction. So you had all the details. And when I was asked to participate in this conference, I decided a very broad topic, which is about everything about contemporary capitalism and its future. And of course, going to be rather difficult to present in a rather limited span of time, but I will do my best, okay? And so you have already seen the title, the very broad topic, which is Neoliberal Managerial Capitalism, its class foundations, and economic and political prospects. So I just explain a little bit. Maybe you might be surprised by the word managerial capitalism, and this will be a central aspect of my presentation. We are not just now in capitalism. I will try to show that. With the managerial relationship, social relationship is extremely important. Okay? Capitalism is constantly transforming itself. Second, you can notice also class foundations. And this is, with Dominic Levy, we work in a Marxist tradition. As you mentioned, the first book I published was in the Louis Althusser collection with the introduction by Althusser. So the Marxist inspiration is extremely important. And this Marxist inspiration is simultaneously fundamentalism in a sense, but also revisionism, because it's not just possible to keep what Marx wrote in the past without some transformation, because capitalism itself is changing considerably. So, but the principles, are central and they are still there. And this is what you can see here in class foundation. We interpret history in relation to social classes. Okay. And so, of course, economic and political prospect, because as you know, everything is political within economics. So, after the crisis, yes, because something new happened, which was this big new structural crisis in, let's say, to simplify, 2007, 2008. It is not the first such structural crisis in the history of capitalism, maybe the fourth. The first being at the end of the 19th century, then the Great Depression, then the structural crisis of the 1970s, and then the contemporary crisis. So, of course, I was attending the conference yesterday, and I was also at the French Institute. So it turned out that the discussion was a lot about the future of capitalism. Will capitalism disappear because of its own internal contradiction or not, and how and when, and is it necessary? Is the situation deteriorating a lot? So I just, this morning I added this to my presentation. The key word to us is transformation. Capitalism is transforming itself constantly. I already mentioned the managerial aspect before. Capitalism is transforming itself. So it's not just capitalism as it is, and then it folds and disappears like this. It's really transforming itself, but transforming itself in two respects. And the first respect is relation of production, and this is what defines a mode of production. Relation of production are transforming themselves, and this will be a key aspect of my presentation this morning. And the second aspect, this is what we call social order. By social order, we mean that each period of capitalism, you have a certain pattern of domination, class domination. What class is dominating, really, but also alliances between various classes, between various fractions of classes, and this is what we call social order. And capitalism is constantly transforming itself. The social order in Europe, in the United States, after World War II, was not the same as the social order that we have now, very bad, which is called neoliberalism, or neoliberal capitalism, or neoliberal managerial capitalism. I will try to explain all that. So key word, key idea is not capitalism as it is and then disappear. Okay, it's really constant transformation into respect, first, relations of production in Marxist sense, and second, what I call social order. And when I speak of social order, I mean, patterns of domination and alliances among classes or various fractions of classes. So things are constantly changing in the history of our society, human societies. Okay, so I will begin here with, As I said, my first book was on more philosophic aspects. So I'm also working a lot on politics. I'm fascinated by the social struggle in the 18th century, the 19th century, the French Revolution, and then the formation of the socialist movement. But I'm not going to speak of that today, because I don't have time, to tell you about all that. So I will concentrate on a social pattern, and in particular in the United States, but also in Europe. So I will begin with a distribution of income. Why the distribution of income? Because, you see, the distribution of income cannot give you the keys of class patterns. But the distribution of income is very important to get some broad idea, quantitative idea of class relationship in our societies. I will use, in particular, the type of data that Thomas Piketty is using, which is data about taxation in the United States, and I will try to comment a little bit about Europe or other countries. So I first want to consider incomes distribution, which means the concentration of income at the top, what the poor people get, at the bottom of social hierarchies in the United States to begin with, And so now we have a new group of researchers which are known as econophysicists, And these people are physicists, but they do some economics, And Dominique Levy himself, was originally a researcher in physics, and then he decided to move to economics. And so the work of econophysicists now is extremely interesting because they have a huge capability to handle data that economists do not have, So I will show you first a graph that I will not explain because I don't have time, but just to show you what econophysicists are doing, econophysicists using US data on income distribution provide us a picture of class relationship in this country. And here, for maybe the first time in your life, you will see classes quantitatively. So this is a picture. And I don't have time to explain technically, what it is, and it's rather complex. But I just want to show you that econophysicists provide us with this picture of social relationship. It's about income, on the horizontal axis, and it's about the concentration of income on the vertical axis. And what you see here is two groups. You see the group at the top, The group at the top, the line at the top. This is the bulk of wage earner. In the United States, their income, the concentration of their income. And the second group here is a completely different group. This is for 20 years, And to the right, you can see top incomes. And what their work shows, I repeat that, I will not explain technically, is that within the United States, you can see two classes, One class is the majority of the population, and this is what you see to the left, with their income is distributed statistically in a certain manner. To the right, people with high income. Their income is completely different. It is distributed in a different manner, They speak of laws of distribution and so on. So they provide us, it's extremely interesting, you can go to our website, you will see the details. They provide us with a picture. These people are not Marxists at all. They look at income distribution, and they say, we do calculation, we see two classes, Actually, two classes is simplifying a lot, but it's true. So if you look at income distribution, you see very well social classes in the United States. Now, I will speak of managerial capitalism to explain you what I mean. Of course, a mode of production is defined by the channel of appropriation of a surplus labor through income distribution by a particular class, at the top. And of course, capitalist classes, this channel of appropriation of surplus labor is surplus value, as you know, and this is the object of Marx analysis. This is still certainly, strongly a feature of contemporary capitalism. But now, in contemporary capitalism, the main channel of appropriation of surplus labor are wages. Top wages, because of this incredible rise, of top wages in the United States and England, and later, I repeat, I will speak a little bit of France. So what shall we do? A type of a Piketty's calculation, which is, but Piketty is not considering at all the transformation of relation of production. We will look at the top 1% of income in the United States. So you take all households, poor people on the floor, of course, rich people, on the top, and we consider the top 1%. Okay. So their income. What is the composition of their income? The top 1% receives two types of incomes. First is one is wages. Second type of income is capital income. By capital income, I mean rents, dividends, interest. Okay? This is the income correspond to ownership. And so we move now to the data, and this time I will explain. Okay? So look at the continuous line. We are in the United States. I will consider the 1%, but also the 10%. Look at the top curve, the continuous line. This is the income of the 10% on top of social hierarchies of income. And they receive what? They receive wages and they receive capital income. But you can see, if you consider the last observation here to the right, you can see that, of course, those people, 93% of their income are wages. They are wage earners. Okay? So this is the top 10%, but the top 10% minus the 1%. It means people between 90 and 99, and now I will consider, and you can see the transformation. So it's growing slowly, I would say. But look at the second curve here, and this is the key feature of contemporary capitalism that many people in the left do not want to see, that they do not want to understand. And so this second line here accounts for the income of the top 1%. What is the composition of this income? You can see that if you begin with the Great Depression, 1920s at the beginning here, their income of the top 1 was formed of 40% wages, 60% capital income. So I am now in the 1920s or 1930s, Keynes period. I look at the top 1% of the distribution of income. These people are what? They are fundamentally capitalist classes in the sense that 60% of their income, of course they pay to themselves wages, but 60% of their income is capital income. And then look at the last observation to the right. Here you have the effect of the 2007-8 crisis, but the curve is now rising again. And you can see that now the top 1%, who are they? They are more than 80% wage earners. Wage earners. And what is striking is a continuous line here, because we cross the crisis, the depression, we cross World War II, then we move to the post-war period, with some kind of democratic social order. Then in the 1980s, we enter into neoliberalism, which is a different society. I will show that. The same continuous evolution of relation of production. Now, most of the surplus, in the sense of surplus labor, appropriated at the top of social hierarchy goes through the channel of wages. And those people, in this group, they receive nice wages, something like $15,000 a month, okay? So they receive. This is a new channel of appropriation of the surplus from the rest of the population. But the capitalists are still there. They almost died, okay? I will show you that they almost disappeared, okay? But they recover in neoliberalism. So, basic transformation of relations of production. We are in a managerial capitalism. Not only managers are doing the work, they are doing the work of managing corporation. Workers, other kinds of employees are doing the work, of course, within enterprises or within the administration. But this is now the main channel of appropriation, and we calculate all that. So it's a very crucial evolution. So I repeat, you see, continuous line. This is a very steady evolution of relations of production, a very steady transformation of capitalism into what we call managerial capitalism. And now I move to what I call social orders, and 3 social orders. Because on the one hand, we have this steady evolution. On the other one, we have the succession of three distinct periods in terms of social relationship, class relationship. Okay, so still the same type of data. It's slightly more detailed, but this picture is just, in my opinion, fantastic. Okay, and I will try to explain in detail what it means. So we are in the United States again, and we divide the population. It's the same variable. Poor people at the bottom, low incomes, high income here. Here you have what is called fractals. So these fractals do not overlap. So you can see the lower part. This is 0, 90 to the left. Huh? 0, 90, I'm at the bottom here. Then between 90 and 95, and then between 95 and 99, there is no overlap. 99, so here you have the top 0.5%, here you have the top 0.1%, and here you have the top 0.01%, which means one household out of 10,000. 16,000 people in the United States now, really families with very high income. And the variable which is represented here is their purchasing power, the purchasing power of their income. It means that we deflate their income by inflation and we see their purchasing power. And why, as you see, there is a very important transformation. But so you have the rise of the purchasing power of this group. For example, let's consider the black dot at the bottom here. This is the purchasing power of the 0.90% of households, okay? Lower one. You can see at the beginning of the century, this low level 30, and then the rise, are continuously rising their purchasing power. They are improving their standard of living to 1960, to 1970, to 1980. And so from about 30, they reach 100 or more than 100 at the end. Okay, so their situation is improving. But why we normalize all groups to the period 60-70? Because all groups, purchasing power of all groups are growing at the same speed. Okay, so we take all the curve and we put everybody to the same point, during this period. And then look, the black dot. Since the 1970s, zero progress of purchasing power of 0 to 90% of households. So you see the contrast between the two periods, from the Depression to the 1970s, from 30 to 100 or more. And then you see after, zero progress. Okay? This is absolutely incredible. But you can look, for example, at the top now. The top here is the one household out of 10,000. And you can see the curve at the top over there, at the top to the left. To the left of the diagram here, their purchasing power diminishes. Diminishes to the 1970s. Then the purchasing power of all groups grows at the same speed. And then we move to 1980. 1980, complete transformation of capitalism. We are entering into neoliberalism. And you see, while the purchasing power of the 0.90% doesn't increase, suddenly incredible increase of the income of this group, and they move from 100 here to 1,000 practically. This is absolutely incredible transformation. So you can see all intermediary groups, they are just intermediary. So from the Depression to neoliberalism, incredible reduction of inequalities, okay, convergence of incomes. And these people were paying very high taxes, in the 1970s, and this is a pre-tax income. So it means that their income diminished tremendously. And then, compared to other groups, not diminished in the absolute, but compared to, relatively to other groups, and then you see neoliberalism, bulk of the people, stagnation, complete stagnation, all groups. And the upper these groups are in the distribution of income, the more they gain, the more they gain. So this is a huge transformation. So above, I would say, the transformation of relations of production that I mentioned before, you have three periods with completely distinct patterns of evolution of income. First, huge reduction of income after the Great Depression, then income, purchasing power grow about at the same speed, and then incredible increase of inequality. The upper you are, the more you gain. This is what neoliberalism is about, and this is what we call, this is exactly the same curve, but considering not total income, but wages. Exactly the same story. Exactly the same story. The 3 periods, okay, and we are considering only wages here, and then the incredible increase of the pattern of this event. Capitalism changed completely. Socially changed completely. So 2 transformations. Transformation of relations of production. We are moving toward managerial capitalism, the importance of wages. And the second transformation, type of transformation, 3 period that we call social order. So capitalism, what we refuse, of course, is not only capitalism, but it's of course, neoliberal capitalism, because we were in a trajectory of reduction of inequality. Nothing was perfect, and we enter now in a world of increasing inequality. Increasing inequality because of capital income, but above all, because of high wages. So this is a completely new trajectory. Typical. So now I want to explain the following. In our work we call finance. We are using Marx's analysis, but I cannot enter into the detail, to call capitalist classes, or the upper fraction of capitalist classes and their financial institution. Why? Because Marx already understood, and he wrote in Capital, that financial institutions or financial corporations are the administrators of capital. Okay? It means that people with money now in contemporary capitalism, they give their money to financial institutions, which are then administrating, managing, their capital, so they get the best income possible. So this is what we call finance, capitalist classes, and their financial institution. Finance is not just the financial sector as opposed to the industry. It's a class relationship, the way we use this notion. Okay? So what is neoliberalism? Or rather, neoliberal managerial capitalism, as I explained before, a new social order, which means a new type of hierarchies of income and wealth in our societies, aiming at the maximization of the income and wealth of capitalists and managerial classes. Okay? And this is what neoliberalism is about. It's a class phenomenon, really. It's a political phenomenon, and they solely transform the economy. This could be another presentation, so I will move very rapidly. How did neoliberalism transform capitalism? How did neoliberalism transform the capitalism of after World War II? They transform management. Keywords may be maximizing shareholder value in the stock market. They change policies, stabilizing prices. They impose globalization. Globalization is placing all workers of the world in a situation of competition, so they can defeat workers, what they did very well in the United States, and then financialization and other things. So this is the topic of our books on neoliberalism. Okay, so now I will concentrate on capitalist classes. We are still in the United States. First, I want to say, what I have described so far is typical of the United States and the United Kingdom. Okay? In France and Germany, so far, nothing similar. Okay? It's very important. Okay? People read Piketty's book and they don't even notice, that nothing similar happened in France and Germany. But now we can see in France that we are beginning. Okay? It means that yes, our capital income are increasing. Yes, our high wages are rising fast. So with a lag of maybe 25 years, now in France, we are entering the same period. And this is one of the reasons we urgently need to transform the political situation in my country. But it's easier to say than to do. Okay, so now I concentrate on top income. Here I will consider only one in the United States again, one household out of 10,000. Okay, it means 16. These people have income according to tax. According to taxes, they have income of more than $1 million every month. Okay, so we are dealing with rich people. Okay? So 16,000 families, and the variable we consider is this 1,000 family, you know, in the total number of family, you know, this was just the introduction. Okay, and so this, what share of total income do they receive? And you can see here that prior to World War II, they used to receive, I'm concentrating on the continuous line here, they used to receive maybe 2 or 3% of total income. Okay? But you can see the second curve, that most of this income was capital income. Okay? And then you see tremendously, after the Great Depression, after World War II, yes, I saw, you know, they lost, you know, considerably. They lost considerably. And I repeat, you know, here we are not considering after-tax income, but they were paying taxes on their top income of 94% after the crisis. So these people, they were ruined by the Great Depression. They were not poor, you know, but nothing which could compare to the pre-Depression period. And then it goes on diminishing to the 1970s. And this is when we have this episode of class struggle, incredible, in which capitalist classes won. You know, the worker movement was defeated. And we enter into the new period, which is neoliberalism. And they recover tremendously. And of course, you know, the new concentration of income more than prior to World War II. They were very, very smart, okay? But you can also, of course, we know that here we see one share of their income because in neoliberalism, most of their wealth is in tax havens, okay? So we see only one fraction, probably, you know, they recovered the double of that. And then you can see also the difference. Now, even in this top group, they receive 1/3 is wages that in a sense they pay to themselves. Okay, so it's a very, very important transformation. Now, I mentioned their financial institutions. This is another work of another group of econophysicists. So these people work on a huge database about ownership in capitalism. Ownership and control, I would say. Large financial institutions own shares of other firms, other corporations, but they also are asset managers in the sense that they manage the wealth of other social groups. Okay? And it's a very interesting situation. These econophysicists, they consider 12 million enterprises. They say that in their data, they have firms, financial or non-financial firms, which make 92% of all profit in the world. So it's practically the world economy. Okay? So what do they find? They find something extremely interesting, incredibly Marxist, I would say. And I will explain what we mean by their financial institution. If you consider a group of 50 or 100 large financial institutions, you find that they are the same family, I would say, in the sense that they control the shares of one another. You can see here a graph that they make. You can recognize, I don't know, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, Barclays Bank, and so on. It's mostly in the United States, but also in England, also in Europe or other countries. And the arrows mean that they own the shares, the stock share of other financial corporations. They own one another. They control one another completely, okay, almost completely. It means it's really a big family. There is absolutely no competition in this group. This is really the heart of the capitalist economy. And all the funds of rich classes are managed by that. And you see all the big arrows means very strong links in the sense of the ownership of shares, and the other arrows are less important, links of this type. So we have a group, let's say to simplify, 50 big corporations, and they own one another, but they own the rest of the world. They own all large transnational corporations. These corporations, they have their own affiliates and so on, and they control the entire world. Okay, so I will skip stuff too. This is exactly what I described before in the sense of finance. capitalist classes and their financial institution. They recovered a very strong power within the social order that we call neoliberalism. So now if I have 2 or 3 minutes, can I speak of prospects? A little bit. So I will go very fast. This could be another presentation. Prospects. The world is not in capitalist world or managerial capitalist world is not in crisis. Okay? It is a huge mistake to believe that the capitalist world is in crisis. China has some difficulty now. They only grow at 7%. They are building capitalism, of course. Huh? Now, Africa, it depends a lot on the countries, but Africa, the continent, is growing on practically 5% every year. It's not at all that the world capitalism is in crisis. The crisis is a crisis of the old capitalist country, mostly the United States and Europe. How do they manage this crisis? Why? Because the open frontier, because of free trade, because of the exports of capital around the world. Capitalists do not care about making profit in China or in Africa or in Latin America. Okay, so so what is happening now? It's happening now that if you look at Europe and the United States, situation is very different. You can see here this is growth in the two countries after the crisis. The United States, the situation is very bad. Okay, investments are diminishing. A very large fraction of capital is going to foreign countries, to the rest of the world, but they are still making small investment in their own countries. They grow at about 2% every year. Europe, in the sense of the European Union here, they recovered in a sense from the recession, and you see that now we are stagnating. Okay, stagnate. So what is the difference between the two countries? We are still in neoliberalism in Europe, in the United States, very strong involvement of the state. The state now has very important policies in the sense of industrial policy, hidden protectionism, intervention of the state concerning the cost of energy, in particular shale gas and everything. And very strong budget and monetary policy, in particular in the US, what we call unconventional monetary policy, very efficient. Very efficient not to transform radically the situation, but to maintain so far a certain level of growth. In Europe, nothing of all that, okay? Just austerity in the sense of orthodoxy, the problem of deficits, a rather shy monetary policy. So Europe is doing really badly in the present situation. And another topic would be the situation in Greece now. So I will conclude. So finally, so you can relax, okay? I'm almost finished. And so actually, in the center of capitalist country, or even in the world this time, we have to confront three crises. And the economic crisis is one crisis. Okay? Second crisis, as is often said, is the crisis of ecology, the ecological crisis, and very important. It would be important to discuss the link between the two. It's not that the economic crisis is causing the crisis of ecology, but of course, neoliberal capitalism is causing the ecological crisis, but it's not the crisis which is causing the second crisis. And as long as we are in an economic crisis, there will be no solution to the ecological crisis. And the third crisis is my favorite, and that I add, because my friend in France, they always have two crises, so I want to have three. But to me, the third one is extremely important. It is what I call the crisis of utopia. Crisis of utopia means, that beginning in the 18th century, in humanity, there was a number of genius people who had the idea that we needed really some kind of economic equality, in society, and the equality in front of the law were not sufficient, okay? And this was the rise of communist idea. And then I would, if I had more time, I would tell in my way, the story of this movement too, of course, through Marx, through Lenin, through USSR, and so on, and to the complete failure of the country which were claiming, the reference to socialism. Okay, and so we are in a situation now, the crisis of utopia, and this is the worst of all this crisis because humanity now has no hope for a better society, and so we are now with the idea that maybe neoliberal capitalism is the end of history, you know. And of course, this is exactly the idea that we cannot accept. And this is one, I think, one of the reasons of this conference and one of the reasons why I'm here.
To thank Gérard Duménil for this captivating lecture, and I would just like to add that maybe there is a fifth crisis, and that is a crisis of time. So I'm sorry for our tight schedule. Yeah, I mean, I think all the audience would like to listen to more, and that's the reason why I'm opening the floor for the questions and comments.
Maybe there is
Okay,
no
so,
question.
there's one.
Thank you very much for a very impressive lecture. And I do interested in what will be in the next month, because next month the Russia will host the BRICS and SCO conference in Ufa, and they are going to, what you say, inaugurate new monetary system that will be, what you say, confront with IMF, World Bank system. I mean, Bretton Woods twin. And in theory, the field of activity of Western capital will be reduced due to this new, financial organization. But what is your opinion about the future of this Western, accumulation of capital as a result of this BRICS, or new system?
What new system?
Because now China and Russia is trying to construct the de-dollarization in the world financing system.
What?
De-dollarization.
De-dollarization.
Ah, de-dollarization. Okay, okay. Well, you see, of course, the dollar is a problem. The U.S., the crisis, 2007 and 2008 crisis, is a crisis of neoliberalism in general. Even in Europe, we had exports of capital, globalization, all these features of neoliberal society. But of course, the US and UK were the most advanced countries. And the crisis originated in the US, and then it was exported to the rest of the world. Why? In particular, because the rest of the world was purchasing bad debts, from the United States and all that. So, of course, one thing that we have to end, the domination of the dollar in the world, okay? And, of course, the U.S. now are fighting to try to maintain their domination around the rest of the world. And at some point, many people thought that maybe the euro would be the new possible world money, or at least to compete with the dollar, okay? But it's not happening now because the economic situation in Europe is terrible. Okay, there is absolutely the difference between Europe and the US is that in the US there is what I call a national feeling. Okay, which means nationalism. Okay, in Europe there is no nationalism, or it is very weak. So Europe is not an alternative for the dollar and the domination of the US. So will it be China? All that will take a lot of time, and I think it's still not decided. But of course, I think we need to end up. We need, who need to end up with domination of the dollar. Does capitalism? Yes, capitalism can survive to the end of the domination of the dollar, but it's not going to solve the social problems, in my opinion.
Okay, more questions?
Or comments, it's not...
Yes.
Wolfgang Merkel, Berlin. I have many sympathies for your presentation. However, we heard too often the term crisis. And I hear this term since the time when I started my university studies. And we are talking about the crisis at least since Marx. Crisis of capitalism, now crisis of democracy. And I would argue it is not the crisis of capitalism. It's a triumph of capitalism, which creates the problems we have in our political order. And the term crisis is one of the worst defined concepts we have in social sciences. We do not have a clear concept which tells us when does a crisis start and when does a crisis end. We may have this in macroeconomics, we have it in the business cycle, we don't have a theory for a whole economy, and of course not for political orders. Therefore, I would, despite all the sympathies, I would be very cautious to talk about crisis.
Okay, but maybe you noticed in my presentation that the main concept was not crisis. The main concept was exactly what you said, was neoliberal capitalism or neoliberal managerial capitalism. And as you said, the triumph of neoliberal capitalism. This is a main, feature of contemporary capitalism. So my presentation really was all on this topic, so I think we completely agree in this respect. Now, it's not possible to say that at the end of the 2000s, there was no crisis in capitalism, and in particular in Europe and the United States, because there was a big crisis. And we wrote a book with Harvard University Press whose title is The Crisis of Neoliberalism. Yes, there was a crisis of neoliberalism, okay? And if you look at the data at every aspect, absolutely no doubt, even if we don't know exactly, we don't have the general theory of crisis, there was a very strong crisis. But crisis doesn't mean the end of neoliberalism, okay? And this is exactly what we are seeing now, which is, yes, capitalism is recovering, but also capitalism is transforming itself, okay? Transforming itself in various respects. One respect, as I mentioned, is relations of production. We are not at all in the same capitalism than during the 1930s, and also concerning class domination, and also concerning international hegemony, concerning the United States. So in a sense, I completely agree with you. The key issue is the triumph of neoliberalism, triumph of neoliberal managerial capitalism. This is a key problem, And the second problem, now I would certainly not deny that there was a crisis in the 2000s, and this could be another presentation, but you, of course, cannot deny that there was a very big crisis, and the crisis is changing a few things, but it's not changing everything. It's not, so far, it is not reversing the dynamics of neoliberalism, at least in the United States.
You showed that the main factor of inequality nowadays are wages,
yes,
not capital income and the rest. So the determination of wages and their distribution is a political fact, not a purely economical one. So there were extra economic causes or operations that were at the origin of this this explosion you showed. So what, to your opinion, happened in this political economic domain to trigger this process?
Cool. Sure, it's called class struggle, okay? And of course, after the Great Depression, and because of the worker movement, independently of the outcome in the country that were claiming themselves as a socialist country, the worker movement was very strong. And after the Great Depression, there was a huge pessimism among capitalist classes. And as you know, for example, Schumpeter wrote this book, I don't like socialism, but we are moving towards socialism. There is no way to escape, okay? And so people were really concerned, and they had absolutely no choice. I would say, for example, in France, Communist Party was very powerful, 37% of the vote, and de Gaulle was really necessary to manage the situation. And so, capitalism changed thoroughly, and this was the outcome of class struggle in a broad sense, but with a victory at what I would call, to simplify, popular classes. But then, gradually, so we enter the period of the social compromise to the left. Okay, I skipped that in my presentation because of time, but I had prepared, videos on that. So then after World War II, there was a kind of social compromise, what we call to the left, okay? And this explains, the pattern of diminution of ownership. But then, gradually, capitalist classes and their allies within top management managed to recover through another type of class struggle. And this is a long story. Maybe we could speak of dictatorship in Latin America, Margaret Thatcher, my best friend, Pinochet, and so on, and then move to neoliberal transformation in Europe. And the social compromise of the post-war years, in my opinion, was defeated also because of the crisis of utopia, because the main fight was about purchasing power. It was not to continue, the social transformation in the sense of earlier utopia. So there was a defeat, class struggle, also top classes, upper classes, struggle, and they win, and this is exactly what happened in neoliberalism. But because of the transformation of relation of production that I've shown at the beginning, they could not do that on their own. They had to do that in alliance with managerial classes. In the US, it was very easy, because managers were used to manage corporations in a certain manner. In a country like France, it was very difficult. Why? Because we have a system of great schools which are owned by the government. They don't go to Harvard, okay? They go to Polytechnique, they go to Normal Sup. And so French managers were not ready to manage corporations with one target, which is maximizing shareholder value. So it took more time, and this explained to a large extent why we are, in a sense, 25 years backward, but not backward toward progress, but we are 25 years backward toward following the US and UK path, But we can see in the new release of data that we are moving in this direction, and we will certainly, follow this pattern if there is no strong radical left in my country, which is the case, I'm afraid, okay, and in Europe. So it's really class struggle. It's a complete story. And the link of class exactly Marx's view. You have to articulate transformation of relations of production, the role of the state, class pattern, and class struggle. And all that is a way of understanding history. And this is what we are trying to do. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one last question.
I agree that in your very fine presentation, you didn't put the emphasis on crisis. One could say that you emphasize transformation, and that could be one side of the story. But I also agree with my colleague that the term crisis is very ambivalent today. And my question would be, you talked about crisis of neoliberalism, and during this crisis of 2008, it seemed for a moment that neoliberalism is some sort defeated, ideologically speaking. But today we see that it is stronger than ever. How do you find this reversal? What is this reversal?
Okay, in this theory of capitalism, we find four large structural crises. Crisis, you have various types of crises. For example, the business cycle. Every 5, 6, 7 years, capitalism is entering into recession. It lasts about 1 year. When we speak of structural crisis, what other people call great crisis or big crisis, okay, it's the end of the last decade of the 19th century, the 1930s, the Great Depression, crisis of the 1970s with a wave of inflation, declining profit rate, and so on, and crisis in 2008. Okay, so what is it? Okay, of course, when we speak of neoliberalism, we speak of neoliberal capitalism or neoliberal managerial capitalism. So if we say, in the title of our book, last book with Harvard, is the crisis of neoliberalism, is a crisis of neoliberal capitalism, but the title of a book has to be short, okay? So we had to take off one word, of course, So, of course, when the crisis happened, people thought history is going to repeat itself. Okay? For example, the Great Depression, and the present crisis is similar in a sense to the Great Depression. It would have been a Great Depression without strong intervention of the state. So capitalism always changes. Okay? For example, I've shown it, after the Great Depression, you have a complete transformation, reduction of inequality, very sharp reduction of inequality, new policies, and so on. It doesn't mean that there was no imperialism. It doesn't mean that there was no destruction of the environment, It was not perfect at all, okay? But still, there was some social progress. So many people, in the left thought, well, a new crisis and a big crisis, so capitalism will change again, okay? And what we contend, but I spent very little time in my presentation in this, is yes, in the United States, it's changing a bit, okay? In what sense is it changing a bit? because in neoliberalism you always have two aspects. One aspect is class foundation. The class foundation of neoliberalism are not changing. Okay? They are still doing the job, I mean, in the government for upper classes in the sense of capitalist classes and managers. The seconds are methods. And this new neoliberalism is less liberal than the capitalism before in the United States in the sense of very strong intervention of the government. Okay? Because many people thought that neoliberalism, was about the intervention of the state, with the market doing everything. It's not true. Now in the US, the state, stepped in to intervene in the economy, and because of national reason, because of the international domination of the US, the government will do everything to maintain the domination, even intervene strongly in the economy, and this is what they are going to do. So is the situation after the crisis different than before? Speaking of the US, class objectives are the same. To maintain the power, imperialist objectives are the same. Okay? But the methods are changing considerably, to a large extent. Okay? So it's not a completely different society. But we are not at the end of this crisis in the old countries of the center, because in Europe you are still in this crisis. In the US, they have this strong policy, particular monetary policy, but their rate of investment is still diminishing. If they don't change the functioning of the US economy, if they don't touch the interests of upper classes, they will disappear as the country dominating the world. And I will end with that. There is already one aspect, one crucial aspect that I have not mentioned, which is the problem of tax havens. So you see how capitalist classes increase their wealth and income thanks to tax haven. Okay, you go to a hedge fund, you make 25% every year, so you become richer. Of course, but now if you pay taxes, it will diminish considerably. But now we see the conflict between the interest of capitalist classes and the interest of the country as dominating the world. We can see it. This is the one example. It is a problem of taxation, because the US government is decided to finish with tax haven because they absolutely need the taxes. You cannot have the best army in the world and wage war everywhere around if people do not pay taxes. Okay? So this is a contradiction now. So the story that I have told is not the end of history. We are still in this crisis, and in particular maybe a fourth crisis too, which is a crisis of US hegemony now in the world. And they made a new step forward, which is to fight against, and even in Europe, to fight against, very strongly against tax haven. And this will contradict the interests of upper classes, including managers, but in particular capitalists. So it's just a long process. We are not at the end. And maybe capitalism will change more, than what we are seeing now, and it's beginning to change more. The problem is that because of the crisis of utopia, there is no strong popular movement. In the US, no. In Europe, it's rather in two countries, as you know. Maybe we have something like that, but maybe they will lose. I'm speaking of Greece now. Okay, so we are in this situation now. But it's not the end of the story. Capitalism, they will have to change more than even they are changing now.